All right. I want to say good evening to absolutely everyone. Take notice behind me that I have an EMF meter right here on the right against the glass of the hotel room I'm in. I don't know if you can see it or not, but if it begins to move or show colors, you can see that it's green. It's got a green on it, and I'll bring it up really close to either camera. And this one. Now bring it over here, and you can see what we got going on. And I do that because later on I'm going to be running the PSP 11. That's a PSP 7. I'm sorry, that's an EMF meter. I'm going to be running the PSP 11. I have a PSP 7 here, but I'm not going to run it tonight. There's some things that I wanted to get into. If I was ever going to, or any of the cohort that I'm with, if we were ever going to do a, say, Messenger Guardians Institute or anything like that, if we were ever going to do something like this, this would be, I would like to call this Digital Colloquium 1. It's just a test. It's just a tester. If we end up doing it and using it, great. But I want to talk about some aspects of what Colin Wilson talked about superconsciousness, and William Buck is where he refers to William Buck, and William Buck's idea from 1905 of cosmic consciousness, of what that is. So again, 1905 from William Buck, that's the whole era of Fortean literature that dealt with spirituality and these kind of issues. It dealt with perceptions and these kind of things. It's also in the era where psychology was truly dealing with the mind and attempting to figure out what was happening to people. But in regards to psychology dealt a lot with casting something as an illness, casting something that was a bad thing, casting something that anything that viewed the world past three-dimensional states was some sort of sickness, some sort of battle with non-reality, this kind of thing. And even in my talks that I've ever given before in regards to this sort of subject, I've tried desperately to not really cast all of that as illness. There's indeed some forms of imbalance in our mental states, but whether or not that makes everything someone is experiencing true or not true is it's we don't always know. There's not always a full way of knowing what we're experiencing and what's being looked at. Now you'll notice there's not so much a whole lot of light on me in one of my cameras, and in this one, of course, there's a lot of light on me, and there's my favorite casting light in the background. It's mainly because I operate better when it's a slightly darker space, but I am also at the same time trying to make sure that you all can see me in just enough of the correct light. And what you all see me doing is trying to get my other camera to focus, because the kind of things that I want to talk about while this one's focusing, I'm going to be talking about really this first digital colloquium essentially talks about myself. I'm not going to talk about so much of any stresses in personal life or anything like that, because that really doesn't have the direct impact amongst those who are listening and who want to know about the kind of things that we do when we're teaching about not just the paranormal, but in other perceptual ideas. Whether we talk ultimately one day about cryptids, UFOs, spirits, interdimensional projection of emotional and mental states into formations, these kind of things. All of those things are very real. They're very much in the same kinds of things, and it's something that we've got to figure out how we're going to deal with when we're talking about it, and how we're going to deal with when we want to know about what's going on, we want to understand what's happening. So there's just so many different things. And the one thing that I really want to talk about is a couple of things. Is I want to talk about the very first, some of the very first massive lucids that I had way back in 1989 and 1990. Now, the one from 1989, I remember it clearly, but it doesn't have as much. I'm still figuring it out, but I'm still going to tell you about it anyway. At least one of them. And then there's two more lucids around 1990 that were waking lucids. I was not physically sleepy or tired or anything like that, but fell into a lucid state while awake and then came out of it. But it's almost like I crossed a barrier between realities that were just as cogent and just as, I could feel, see, smell, hear, taste. It was perception. I can't put any intellectual depth to it, like in Colin Wilson's Super Consciousness from way back in the day. Colin Wilson has since passed away, but like in Colin Wilson's material, where he talks about someone else's experience and their experience about things not being able to be decided or talked about on an intellectual level. The things that happen, you don't have time to think about it when it happens. You don't have time to make it up, and you don't have time to to take notes and write about what's. All you can do is perceive what's going on in front of you, and as long as it stays solid with you and it stays with you, then there was something about it. It went into long-term memory. I'm sure there are psychiatrists. Okay, now my chair is moving, so I stopped for a moment there because there was a high-pitched noise. Running a podcast, and the speaker was on, so the speaker's long off. It turned off physically, and the PSP-11's not on. Only the EMF detector is on, but there was a high pitch in that moment. So if anybody rolls back the audio and slows it down, you can hear what's going on. Absolutely feel free to tell me what you think is happening or what you can hear. And this kind of reminds me too of something that I normally do when it comes to doing this kind of work. I can easily separate the audio, by the way, from my files and figure out if anything was going on in that moment. I can just separate it out when I edit this. But normally, and this is something I also do, because it's something that's makes my work more credible. And I'm shaking my other camera over here by accident purely, where I can run an audio device and try and figure out what was just happening. So you can, again, when you're seeing me do these things, you're seeing this in action, where I'm trying to run more than one video and more than one audio option, so I can review back on that. But that was so specific in the moment that it distracted me for a moment while I was talking about superconsciousness and being able to perceive things and being able to talk about things. So I want to really get into that, but I want to go ahead and do this. Now, I've called this the perceptual experience of the paranormal, but it's not just the paranormal. It can be UFOs, it can be cryptids, which is other beings that can exist between dimensional states, but that can be seen in the physical from time to time, and people go to look for them, whether they be chupacabras or Bigfoots or what have you, any of those kinds of things, or fairies or those kind of things. It's those kind of ideas and notions of what it is that we perceive, real or unreal. But quite often, and you'll hear this, science catches up to spiritual mysticism. It's not the other way around. Quite often, spiritual mysticism will understand and have very basic ideas of the quantum level of the universe and how it works. The smallest, super smallest, tiniest of three-dimensional space, of what is perceived to be three-dimensional space, and how it works. And I'm again getting that audio sound. I'm marking it on my video so that we can actually hear that it is going on and that I can actually hear what's happening. I can actually hear it going on. So it's really, really interesting. It'll definitely be an interesting experience to bring all of this together and try to edit this together. And I don't know if I can do it right. I don't even know if I'm just going to end up using one camera version of this. I'm probably going to actually use both versions and then cut them in as best I can. But it's really interesting that this didn't start until after I hit record on both my camera and on the travel computer on the laptop. That I started hearing, and this doesn't happen when I use these devices to do this. So forgive me, but I'm hoping both devices last. And let me turn on this device here, this little pen device that you guys see me using. Let me get it turned on. Okay, it looks like I'm not going to be able to use this for right now because I'm really wanting to get that sound. But, however, there is a device I can use and that I can hook up right now that can help me do this. A device that's silent right now, what things are going on. And I'm going to put it on silent, but I'm going to turn my phone on and turn the audio on and see if I can catch these instances. Like right now. Here it goes again. Again, my phone wasn't even on when any of this happened, so it's not my phone creating a signal or creating something. I'm going to put my phone on airplane mode, and you hear my phone turning on. I'm going to put it on airplane mode, and so that nothing else comes through, so that I can set it to do something with in silence. So I can set it to actually record an audio. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go to audio. I'm going to go to tape to talk. And I'm going to press record, which is, and talk about the perceptual experiences of the paranormal and super consciousness. And what I want to do as we talk, and again, Mark, there is a audio sound coming in again, is I want to talk about a little bit of super consciousness from Colin Wilson's book about super consciousness. Again, I'm treating this kind of similar to a lecture, but I'm trying to make it interesting. I'm trying to really, throw in my own ideas and the things that are happening with me, with what's going on. I'm trying to throw all of that in there. So I'm hoping to make this interesting. So, and when I go to chapter 4 and I start reading, in 1901, Richard Morris Buck published one of his classics of mysticism, Cosmic Consciousness, and he talked about some of the things that he finds in cosmic consciousness. And we go through this, and we go through Colin Wilson's talk about what Buck was doing. And again, this was 1901. I don't know if I said 1905, but 1901. And William Buck was well ahead of his time, along with Charles Fort and all of these other people who came out of the spiritualism movement. But again, and many of them weren't spiritualists. A lot of them were psychiatrists and psychologists. Not sure how much medication they would have had. So psychologists. So, and who understood a lot of things mentally, and they started off really on a much deeper search, evolution-wise, scientific-wise, to try and figure out the human experience. But it really took them on a very deep, and what was back then called the spooky science, what became known as quantum science, on a very deep, deeply penetrative level of understanding, whether that tiniest bit of three-dimensional space, known as quantum space, whether that leads directly into non-linear, non-three-dimensional space, fourth dimension, fifth dimension, all these things. Well, this is where that understanding starts to go. This is where our understanding starts to go. And Colin Wilson wrote about Buck's experience. Buck talked about his own experience, and let me make sure that I'm making clear about the experience. So Buck talked about his experience with Shelley, and yes, I do mean Keats, Shelley, Wordsworth, Browning, all of these people. And reading with them and talking with them and hanging out with them. And he ultimately came to the understanding for himself that, and it's quote, okay, from page 28 of Colin Wilson's book, cosmic consciousness. Oh, I'm sorry, super consciousness, but cosmic consciousness is what Buck is talking about. The cosmos is not dead matter, but a living presence. That the soul of man is immortal, that the universe is so built and ordered that without any peradventure, all things work together for the good of each and all, that the foundation of principal world is what we call love, and that the happiness of everyone is in the long run absolutely certain. So yes, this is going to sound almost religious, but this is not what this is not where Buck was going. This was based on experiences he was having, not churchy religious experiences. Not that those are in any way invalid. Many of those can certainly be valid based on who's experiencing it and why, and if they're being genuine about their experience. There are those who say they have experiences, but they're just playing up to the camera, playing up to family, playing up to friends, and it's not genuine. It's not per se even real to the person talking about it. But that's not what we're dealing with here. And even if it were something he got during a church service, which was not according to this, even if he did come to these conclusions during that sort of thing, it doesn't make it less valid. It's just that he's using several different layers to get to it. William James is talked about, of course, because I used William James in my own graduate work when I was doing my MFA, and at Goddard College in Vermont. And right now I'm coming to you from Boston, but and varieties of religious experience was one of the things that I had to read, which Colin Wilson has also used in his books, and he's quoting. I didn't even know about Colin Wilson's work, and he did an incredible work on the supernatural, on the occult. One of his very big, thick books that my group, that we've gotten a hold of to read and to use. But I didn't want to use it for tonight. We may use it on another night. But this is one of Colin's smaller pieces. Now, again, if this sounds boring, I apologize. I'm hoping to make it more interesting as the recording goes on, and hopefully we can keep things going. And I want to check to make sure that my audio is still running, so I'm going to pick it up, and it is still running. The audio is at 637, 640 now. And again, we're going to keep talking about this and seeing where we go. William James talks about it in regards to what Colin Wilson is talking about, and they're all from the same time frame, early 20th century. James suggests that mystical experiences are not different in kind from ordinary consciousness, but is merely an extension of ordinary consciousness, and that even alcohol can produce a mild but valid mystical experience. He gives three of his own experiences. He talks about three of his own experiences. And I'm not going to go into what those experiences are because, again, you can order and read this. And Wilson is using a lot of different people to include where superconscious idea comes from, called cosmic conscious back in the day, back in a century ago. More than a century ago now. He's using, William Buck. He's using William James. All of these things. And they talk about the mode of consciousness, and this is quote: the mode of consciousness was perceptual, not conceptual. The field expanding, the field of perception is expanding so fast when things are happening to you that there's no time of conception. There's no time to intellectualize what's going on, but you are perceiving it. But there's just no time to conceive it. There's no time to think about it, or it goes away. And in this case, so in James's words, William James's words, intellectual processes aren't running in that moment. Doesn't mean the intellectual processes can't. It means they're not running in the time that's happening. They're not running in that moment because those processes will block what's going on. If you're overthinking something, putting too much brain into it, putting too much, I can't remember if it's left side, I think. I could be wrong, and I'm going to put it at the bottom of the screen if I am. Putting too much left thinking into it while the right side is trying to show you something. It comes up and tries to stop you so that you don't overthink something while you're perceiving it, while it's happening to you. And this is really interesting. Why I wanted to read about this. Why I wanted to read about that from Colin Wilson is because it gave me the idea I needed to have about talking to you all about my own experiences. And with this, I want to tell you about my important lucids. On top of that, about the devices in the room, which I already mentioned to you that I have, and that I'll turn on towards the end of the broadcast so we can do a little experiment. An experiment that may go nowhere, or it may go somewhere, which is, I think, really interesting, wonderful, useful. It may go somewhere. But I want to talk about the events in the two houses that I lived in when we lived in, and I'm going to say that, when we lived in Boone, North Carolina. And I say we because my roommate of the time and myself, who were really good, super good friends. We were family to each other. And I remember some things happening to my roommate that I'm not going to put that person's experiences up because that is an experience owned by him and needs to be relayed by him at some point if he ever wants to. Off camera, maybe coming on as a guest in audio, that kind of thing. But my experiences, and I will relay an experience of another person, but I won't identify who that person is who had an experience in my home. But I won't relay who that person was because, again, it's that person's experience. But that one is a little bit different because it relates back. When we were living in Boone, North Carolina, the first house we lived in, both houses had the same owner, and we lived in a small house that had a small antechamber at the front of it, a small entry chamber at the front of it, that used to have a door in it, but into the living room, but the only door was the door to the main front. Then there was a little area where you could put your coat and shoes, and then into the living room. It looks like it did at one point have an entry, a second door, but that doesn't matter. It didn't at this point, and I always called it an antechamber. So we were living there, and one night when I was writing my first paranormal novel, something really crazy happened, and I was typing, and the lights were all out, and I wasn't trying to freak myself out, and I was just trying to write, and I didn't want a whole lot of extra light. It was late at night. There weren't any college students out screaming and yelling like there might have been because I lived right on the edge of Appalachian State University's campus. And I'm going to again identify where I was because I'm not there anymore and I haven't been for over a decade. But there was a lot happening, a lot going on in the novel, and I had just started it off, just got the first few pages, and I was working on it for because I was not competing with other professors. I was doing it for kind of summer colloquialism because I was teaching in the summertime, and I was doing it to be so we could be active with each other and do writing and then give over the writing for review. And I wrote a story, and in doing so, I remember very distinctly when I say I heard something, it's more of I felt someone walk into the room. Now, growing up as a child, when you hear someone walk into the room, you feel the air in the room move, just like it would move, in physics and all of that. I felt the air in the room move as if someone was coming up the set of steps leading from the basement directly into my living room. And I remember it felt like it got closer. There was a slightly high pitched sound, and then the hackles on my neck stood up. I wasn't looking for this, and I wasn't scared. And I remember looking up from my keyboard and going and saying to this being, to this person, okay, you need to leave. You just need to stop. I'm working on this. Please go away. And I remember after I said that, the hackles went down. I wasn't nervous anymore. It's almost like they went back down the stairs. I could feel them descending down again. And again, downstairs. It's like they didn't move away really from the steps. It just felt like they had gotten close. And then they were gone. And I breathed in, just breathed in. And I was okay. And I kept writing the first chapter. And I was pretty much sat down and wrote that first chapter of my novel, which I may ultimately publish. Right now I won't tell you what the name of it is. This is years ago that I wrote this. This is, I would say, 12, 10 or 11 years ago, I would say. I wrote that around the summer. Yeah, so about 11 years ago is when I wrote it. I wrote it in the summer of 2009 or 2010. So, which was really interesting to have written a novel like that. But that was the first time I remember for a long time, and this was around 2010, feeling the presence of another in the room that wasn't someone in my family who was actually standing in the room watching or whatever. Back when I was a kid, when I could understood what it felt like for someone to quietly enter a room without making any kind of noise, hence quietly, and actually disturb the air, but enough, because it was carpeted and they might not have been wearing shoes, and I didn't hear them, and I just turned and looked in there. And my back was closed. It's that kind of thing. It's that exact kind of feeling. The moving out of that house, when we moved in the summer, at the end of the summer of 2010, at the end of December 2010, we moved into another house by the same landlord. Now, during the night when I was cleaning the house before moving and moving things out of the basement, I very distinctly recall after moving a lot of things out of the basement for garbage, things that we had to take out, and moving them into the garden, the physical garden that we had already gotten food out of. But we moved it into the garden. I moved it into the garden area. I was working at night downstairs outside at night. And I remember very distinctly feeling someone standing in the basement, looking out the back door of the basement, and actually almost like they were saying something and looking at me or whatever. And I remember it distinctly. It didn't happen very often at all. It didn't happen so much. But it took place. It happened. And again, I wasn't disturbed by what I was experiencing. But I remember it going on. I remember it happening. I remember feeling what I was going through. And it was a really wickedly interesting experience and not something I can so quickly judge. So it was really interesting. It was really incredible. The next set of experiences came from the house we lived in, but in Boone. And I won't say which house. There's a few houses on. Perceiving, it was so, people standing on the porches and the whole street just being full of spirits, full of entities, just looking. And I'm like, wow, they're all just standing around looking at us as we're moving in to this other house. And the house was a huge L-shaped house. And when we went down to the house one night, we walked from the main house to the lower house. From the upper house to the lower house is what I called it. Just to move, we were moving things in between. And we walked down the street into the house. There was this, I'm not trying to be crude. There was this old woman smell that we were getting. And the old woman smell was very particular, was very specific. I'm not sure to a particular person, but it smelled like the kind of smells you would smell in a place where there's maybe a lot of old mothy clothes and plastic covered furniture and old mats, things in elderly people's homes especially from the old day. I don't know as much now, but it was that kind of smell. And it was very, very, very particular. And at first I thought it was the apples that were dropping around our property because we had apple trees near the front. Just one tree. But that didn't smell the same at all. Then the smell went away. And we laughed about it. Myself and my roommate laughed about it, and it was funny. It was, and we went in and did our thing, and just was moving things into the house. As we experienced the house as time went on, it became more very palpable that something very unpleasant was in the house. More than once, we might break into an argument. Something might go on. A dark negative kind of energy would pounce out of nowhere. Ultimately, we would pile into the car and leave and go elsewhere, a friend's house, some other place that we would go to get away from the house for the night, a place that we had access to at any time we wanted to go into, just to get away from the place. That happened more than once. And one of the people's houses we went to, well, it was the same house. That person was over at our place at one time and relayed a story to me that they hadn't actually relayed the first time when it happened. That's a first time, the only time it happened with them. They hadn't actually relayed this story, but the person said, I was in the living room, and because it's an L-shaped house, in the front of the L is the main living room, is the main dining-ish room, living room, or dining room, living room area, and an L-shaped larger portion to the living room that we used to put a lot of technical stuff in, a lot of equipment and stuff that my friend was using for his job, and then we had the kitchen on the other side of the L wall of the front part of the L, and then we had the other L, which was the bathroom, the den, office that we used, and the bedroom, which was a big portion of the L, way up in the front part of the house, and then we had a door leading to the back area behind our house to a stream, because we were up on a little bit of a hill. And the person who was at my house said, I saw someone walk into your kitchen from the back patio, and I walked into your kitchen and said, hello, who's here? Well, what they saw is the person, I'm sorry, not walk into the kitchen, but walk out of the kitchen, out that back end door, which is next to our living room, and walk out clearly. And this person was not into seeing shadows and ghosts and these kind of things. It's not a thing. That they were very religious and still are, and that's not a thing for them. Not that it's not real. It's not something they often think about. They're fascinated by it, but it's nothing that they think about because of their own religious nature in regards to those kind of things. But that's not a bad thing. So it's not a statement of belief or disbelief, but because the person never really explored it before. But we weren't told for a couple of years, that 2 or 3 years, I think that had happened. And the person said, after we told them about our experiences in the house, the person said, oh my goodness, you say you saw a dark, shadowy person, in the living room and wearing a leather jacket, almost like a jacket with a hat on, dark hat. They said, well, I saw someone very dark move in like that, or move in from the kitchen out to the back door. We saw that, or I saw that. She goes, well, you all were in the bedroom, because one of the computers was set up in the bedroom, or the TV, or we were doing other stuff in the bedroom. And so our other friend was with us in the bedroom, and we didn't hear what was going on at the front of the house, the bottom of the L, which was really weird, really strange. If I can show you just a layout of what the house looked like, I will. So I can't switch to my screen to show you because I'm only using one screen, so it will be an infinity screen if I switch over to it. But I'll do what I can to show that to you. Really weird, really strange, really incredible. And then we had a problem with, we had a team come visit us because we were having trouble. We were hearing doors close at night separately. And while one person was awake, one person was sleeping, we were hearing this happen. Doors were closing in the middle of the night, shutting. When we think the other person was doing it, well, the other person was actually, because we only had one bedroom, so we had to use, we slept in the same bedroom. So the other look over, and the other person's over there sleeping. It's dead up. Not for a joke, dead, but sleeping. And it's like, okay, he's not there, so someone just closed the den door. And to close the door to our den, you have to take the door and really push it hard and shut it because it was along the carpet and it couldn't move. You have to move it manually. And that was more than interesting. And also, if any of you have ever listened to my radio show, I talk about near-death experience in my radio show, and I don't know exactly where I talk about it, and I guess I can talk about it here. But in that house, the L house on it, what I call the L house, there was so much. The air was so heavy and depressed and depressive and oppressive that it got to a point where I myself was suffering from depression anyway, and can suffer from that, um, just due to just other pressures in life that were going on. And what was so insane about all of that is I remember thinking, I'm done. I'm not coming back. I'm not waking up. Things in life weren't going well. Um, I had a job that I had just been laid off from, not fired, nothing like that, because I work in the education industry, and when you do the kind of work we do, there are these right to work states, and almost all of them are this, where they can lay you off whenever they want to. So that's just what took place, and that can really mess you up when you enjoy your job, you enjoy teaching, you enjoy what you do. So that was really bad. Other things were making things just oppressive. We were about to move to a place in Vermont that was big enough to give us both more room. And that took time when we got to Vermont, but we hadn't moved yet. And the pressures of moving, all these things were going on. The pressures of moving. And I remember giving up, just being done. And one day I didn't wake up. One morning in 2011, in June, I would say, in late June of 2011, I did not wake up. Uh, my friend looked over at me, saw that I was not only still, like I would be sleeping, but I wasn't breathing, and I looked grayish, no color. And my friend got up and hovered over me for a moment and started yelling, um, you know, wake up, start breathing, breathe. You're not dead. Don't leave like that. What's going on? How are you okay? Are you? And I remember, this is the thing, is I remember being in a place that wasn't bad. I just remember almost like I was stepping into a tunnel, like a cave. It was cool, damp, moist, but it felt great. Like you were being surrounded by a little bit of fog, like what's outside now in the Boston skyline airport over near the airport here. Um, that was happening, and I remember feeling very peaceful, very much like I'm okay to be gone. This is Everybody else will get over it. And then I heard my friend's voice. And if you ever listen to my radio show and know how to get onto my links, and I'll try to make those available to you, you'll have heard that. And I remember looking back, like I was looking behind me, because I could hear my friend's voice, and I was just ready. I had never felt so peaceful. And then suddenly, my friend's voice was in front of me, and my ears had opened up, and I was back in my body. It was such an incredible experience for me. I was not elated. I was not overwhelmed. I was disappointed. I was so terribly, terribly disappointed with what happened. I didn't want to be back. I was done. I was ready to give up. I was maybe 41 at the time. I think, no, I was 42. Almost, I was nearly 42 at the time. So I was not prepped to be, I was not prepped to be a part of any of this anymore. I was just done because the stress levels were so bad that I remember how it made me feel, or how I made myself feel. It all depends on how you're perceiving things. But I remember how I felt about all of that, and it was, to say the least, insane. And then I remember going and talking to a family member, talking to my own mother, and she said it just wasn't your time to leave yet. You had more to do. And I remember thinking to myself, and this wasn't, and although she may very well have meant that on a religious level, that's actually not invalid. Whether you mean it on a religious level or a spiritual level, they're not one and the same. But I think it was more, she meant it more on a spiritual level than on any kind of ritualistic religious level. Open a page book and read it, some religious document. It wasn't meant that. So it wasn't meant on a religious level. It was meant on a spiritual level. And I think that is a much higher, deeper, higher vibration, deeper level than anything religious. And I realized that might have been the case. I realized that could very well have been the case because I had been feeling that, and it was humbling, but still disappointing. Because even today, I still have a very slight disappointment over never having left back then. And when you're in that state of it's time to go, you've been stressed out so badly, and things are just done. Physical age doesn't matter. This is where you realize whether you're 4, 41, 104, it doesn't really matter. Time comes, time comes. But if time isn't coming and there's other things, I could have come back paralyzed. I could have come back with half my brain paralyzed or dead. I don't know. That's not how that works. It would be brain death or no brain death. But it could have been brain damage is what I'm saying. That didn't happen. But boy, was I really not impressed. And I tell you all of this now in this in essentially in this online colloquium 1. I tell you this because this is what got me into true exploration of the paranormal. I had actually started some little tiny cursory stuff, audio files I didn't know how to deal with or listen to. I wasn't really adept at it. I was only occasionally watching the shows. I didn't really start watching those. I was watching my fiction, sci-fi, and fantasy stuff, and I wasn't really all that afraid of things. My sci-fi shows, Star Trek, and all these other things, they were much more realistic for me and thoughtful and engaging. And the other shows were just fascinating on an eerie level, and I didn't really care. They were dumb, stupid, and I say that only because they made no sense, and they were working on people's fears and really messing people's heads up. Me, it didn't really mess me up. I just found it amusing and moved on. So, nothing in my entertainment area of my head worked or made any difference when it came to those kind of shows. So nothing I was watching in entertainment. I wasn't watching anything that night, that day, or whatever. I was under a lot of pressure. I was probably grading papers from institutions that I was teaching at, and the ones I was teaching at online, because I was teaching at one online at the time that I still do today. So, and so I had those pressures on me, and but so nothing made that happen. It was around the same time I had first started visiting grave sites and taking pictures and stuff like that. Again, I'd done that once or twice and had caught some things that were interesting, but I never really let it affect me. It really didn't do anything for me. And then I called one of my old time mentors in food service management way back up in Ohio, and I called and talked to him. And it turns out he had a paranormal investigation team and had wished I had told him about it. And I didn't tell him about it until I had a team come out to my house to find out what was going on. Why the old woman smell? Why the shadowy person that was appearing in the living room? And the other instance with the person in the hat and that was not so far my experience, but another's. But the person with the hat and a long leather jacket and a long leather that was, and to each of the people that someone appeared to in my house, each one of them are not, none of them were known to ever make things up, ever fantasize about ghosts and stuff like that. they found the sort of thing amusing. They might watch for about 10 seconds and giggle, giggle, hackle, and they might have some agreement on some spiritual ideas, and maybe there's something out there in the world. But it really wasn't a thing that they thought 10 minutes passed or 10 seconds passed sometimes. They just didn't, we didn't get into it. It was, again, it was amusing, and we keep going in life. But these things kept happening. We kept having disturbances, and ultimately we had a team come in to my house. It's the only time I ever had a team visit my house or my property separately. Because after that, I developed my own paranormal sensibilities and started training myself in what this team was doing. And there was no money involved. I didn't pay them. They were friends of mine. And they had a team, and they came over and started doing things. And without me telling them, because I didn't want to give them perceptual issues, they talked about the Civil War soldier who was the one that ran out of the kitchen and out the backyard, and they talked about the child who had polio and was looking for his dad because his dad lived in that neighborhood, and I think in that house way back in the day when the university was still a college, and the old woman that watched after him, who was still watching after him. And I never told them about the old woman smell. I never told them about an old woman at all, but that I felt it. And now as I'm talking, I'm getting the hackles up around me again, and hope maybe there's something on audio that comes up while I'm doing this. Because if there's any other sounds coming in through, I'll hear it. But I've got an audio device, my phone running over here, and I've got both of the cameras running. And yeah. So the phone is at 35 minutes right now. So I wanted to tell you all about that. Now let's go work our way back in time, because I really wanted you to have an impression of me with this, impression of my ideas and some of the things that I've talked about in my own things that I wished I had recorded or had saved the recordings of, because I've got friends who've recorded me teaching this kind of stuff over the years in 2018, and I still wonder whether or not they have those recordings and that I can use them on our channel. Like I said, if Messenger Guardians ever becomes an institute, then I'd like to make this, this is Colloquium 1, this is the introduction, and each of us who can teach will introduce ourselves in a way that makes it personal to literature, like one of Colin Wilson's books. It makes it appropriate to this. It makes it, and I also have William Buck's Collective Consciousness. I went and bought the old 1901 book. I have that as well. But I do that so you can at least get a sense of, just a tiny sense. It's not even comprehensive, but a tiny sense of what my literature is, the kind of things I read, the kind of things that have happened to me, the kind of things that brought me into what I'm doing, and to why we teach about this, and why not that the paranormal, and in regards to spirits, ghosts, entities, and not everything's a ghost, not everything. There could be entities everywhere, but they're not all ghosts. There are people who've long passed away. They're just not. But there's all sorts of things out there. The cryptids that I explained earlier, UFOs, and other perceptions and other projections and mental projections and psychic projections and all these things. We can actually pull things into our reality and create. I say create, we can't destroy or create energy. We know this. Our science has caught up to that. But we can bring a perception into our reality of a spirit, of a ghost, and that's the same as bringing a perception into our reality of getting a job, having money, those kind of things. You've heard of the power of suggestive thought, and those kind of things. I taught one subsection in a class I was teaching to college students about that kind of thing, but I only taught it once, and it wasn't a bad thing. No one came at me on it, but I didn't always like some of the materials I read on it, because a lot of materials were always going towards people wanting to make lots of money and have big cars and have big houses. It was always about materialism. Materialism isn't always necessarily a bad thing, but it was always over materialism. It's always more than what was necessary, and too specific of the things that are. And it was never about anything deeper and faster vibrating than just the physical. You don't have to exclude the physical from the things that you want in life, but it's not the only thing. And I'm not talking about, again, I'm not talking about religious aspects. I'm talking about quantum level, smallest things in the physical, so small that they may merge into the non physical, into fifth, fourth, fifth, sixth dimensional spaces, fourth dimension being time, fifth dimension being well outside of time and physical space, into another dimensional space itself. There are layers of three-dimensional space that could go on forever and be alternate realities, alternate worlds, other worlds with layers that are jumped across in order to cross from planet to planet without going into space. There are these kind of layers that are practiced with, and again, our fiction is quite often more interesting than what our science seems to be until our science actually catches up to the fiction. So that's where we are with that. That's where we go with these kind of ideas. It's so multi-layered. And I know I'm not going to be able to cover everything that I'm talking about, but I also want to get to a kind of couple of lucids, the first ones that had ever happened to me, that I want to cover real quick, and to tell you all about. And that after I do that, I'm going to bring over my PSP-11 and sit it. Listen for it. Any technology I have is far enough away from that to not trigger it. It's got to be the EMF meter, electromagnetic field detector, has to be up on it practically within inches to detect it. Because you use it to detect behind walls where electrical lines are running and stuff like that. There are no big, massive monster power lines in this area of downtown. There's power lines somewhere, then it's running deep underground, or they're way out on the edge of town, or in areas of town where there's central areas for them, but there's nothing setting that off. So, but I want to give you two things about two lucids that happened. At least one lucid I remember very particularly, very specifically, being out of my body. It was 1989. It was during the time I had first gone to West Virginia. And I left my first year and a half of college at community college, and I went into the Job Corps and went to their college program. I graduated high school and did all that and went to college. I just wanted to do it a little differently. So I did that, and I remember dreaming a lucid memory of being out of my body and seeing a myriad of colors over the landscape, and the trees were colorful and the leaves were beautiful and were on the ground, and it was around it wasn't even in the fall when it happened. It just looked like it was. And I remember being over the trees, and there were other people with me in this lucid, and I have never to this day forgotten this. This is 32 years ago, and I remember it so well. And the moment I realized what was going on, I'm like, wow, I can control this. I can raise up however far I want to. I can do all this. Snap! I popped back into my body, and it was over. Now I had another lucid, and I wrote this lucid down somewhere in a little book that I used to have, a little blue book with little tiny black children on it, cute little African-American black children on it. I don't even know what happened to that. That had some incredible writings that I did. And I was prolific in writing by hand back then, and I could type too, but I was prolific in writing by hand and writing a lot of stories. And I had another one where I was floating through the clouds with a bunch of other people, and we were carrying these huge banners, like family banners, and we were floating through the clouds in these beautiful, huge banners, and we had these colorful clouds, and it was just this amazing experience. And I wrote that one down, and that one ended when I realized what was going on. But it was very lucid. It wasn't like a normal dream where you wake up and it fades. This was the point of not just what was in both Buck and James's material about. This was more than just conceptual. I mean, I didn't think about it, but it was perceptual. I was perceiving it, and then I started thinking about it and could tell they were banners and could tell. So things did start happening. Oops! I just smacked my I just smacked my mic. but things were happening that were causing stuff to happen, and it was just truly an amazing situation. And then I popped out of it. That wasn't the only thing. In the summer of 1991, I was taking some of my college class. I was taking no summer of '91. I was taking summer classes, college classes, at West Virginia. What was called at West Virginia Institute of Technology. I was taking a mathematics course, which ultimately I failed. I was terrible at math. I could do it. It's just I never had enough time to work out the problems, and would just give up. But and I was listening to a lecture, and I think it was my math course. I was listening to a lecture, and all of a sudden, I remember I suddenly just I wasn't sleepy. I'd had plenty of sleep that night, and my head went down like this. And then suddenly, I woke back up, and it was clear. I knew that I was a black woman. Didn't have to be. Just turns out that's what I knew. That's what I understood conceptually without even thinking about it. So maybe it was perception and not conception or conceptual because I didn't have to think about it intellectually. I knew it already. Wearing a long dress, very late 19th century. My foot was up on a chest, like a chest that you would keep clothing in. Like a military chest, but it was one of those things. Other people have different names for them, brand names for them. Elderly people would know what I'm talking about. Well, much older people, maybe they would know what I'm talking about. And I remember I was waiting inside a shelter out in the middle of what would be desolate landscape. I don't know if it was a desert or it was just it was very dusty grasslands area. And I remember one other person was waiting with me, and we were waiting for a stagecoach to come along, horses, buggy kind of thing. And I knew I'd be allowed on that one, but I was a very no nonsense, don't bother me kind of person, and I remember that. And then all of a sudden, my head came back up, and I was back in the classroom where I was in a math class in this body, and I remembered it. It was a waking lucid. It was a waking lucid. Um, Absolutely amazing that it took place the way it did and when it did. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't fully understand what had happened to me. And this was years before I got into paranormal. And I wrote down this experience, and it never went away. The experience went into my long term memory and stayed in my long term memory. And although other memories from that era that I've lived in 3-dimensional space with have faded, some memories have faded, some have not, my lucids have stayed solidly in place. I even had one when I was about 5 years old of falling and really falling. And I recall thinking, why am I falling from the edge of a cliff? And then suddenly I landed in my body. It must have, because I popped back up awake. Not afraid, but as if I was falling back into something. And I woke up. And I remember thinking, why was I falling? And I remember, I never forgot that. I was in first grade, and I remember this. And I remember my whole life thinking, especially when I was in middle school and high school, no one's ever going to believe that I have that. And it wasn't just a dream. It was way beyond a dream. And one time I had said to my dad that there is something that we don't perceive that is beyond the physical. And he got into it with me about it only being this life, and that, air is breathed into your spirit when you breathe in oxygen. And I remember thinking that folks are crossing up physical action of the body with what I now understand is quantum, or even beyond quantum, spiritual action, or the energy that we are, that our consciousness is, which is not just created or destroyed, being confused with the energy our body is. And they're not, they operate on two or three entirely different sets of levels. They vibrate. One is our actual consciousness that vibrates at extraordinarily fast speeds, extraordinarily beyond light, even into quantum level speeds, while our physical body vibrates at a much slower rate. And what's holding it in place is likely our conscious energy. Our consciousness energy is holding the body in place, stopping it from rotting away. Once the consciousness energy moves off and departs, It isn't destroyed. It might slightly change its form, but it's not destroyed. It's not gone. The physical body is no longer held in place by something that it needs to operate it, that needs to make it do its thing, and so it returns to its state. It's not destroyed. It just separates back to its component forms. We call it rotting and other things, but I may not know all the scientific terms, and I'm sure those of you listening out there know it all or know much of it. No doubt, go for it. If I've used the wrong term on something, sorry. Please don't focus on it on that or become laser focused on that mistake, because but this was just an incredible kind of thing that I was understanding in the conversation that I was having with family a long time ago, when I really didn't have much of a voice for myself. I was only 14 or 15 or 13 or something. And, you growing up, you don't have an overwhelming voice. Not in this culture. And most planetary cultures don't give their children an overwhelming voice. Some do, but many don't. So I didn't have much of a voice to put out what it was I was feeling and what was going on. But it was truly an incredible thing. There's something I want to cover with you before we go into using the equipment real quick. Now, we've already seen that this piece has been going on, and I don't think it's moved. And if it has moved, or you all saw it move, please let me know, because there's no way to miss the colored lights back that's on that. And if it didn't move, great, fine. Sometimes it can't pick up anything, even when something is present. But I wanted to talk to you all about one more thing real quick. And now if I could remember what that one more thing was, I'd actually say it. But before I got into showing you the equipment, or just being able to pull out some equipment, and I do that in order to just test the environment and see what comes around us when we're talking about it. What beings come into our space, come into our room, come in to talk to us, come in to be with us when we're doing this. And it's not always possible to know what's happening, but it may take a couple of times. I may come back on this recording and show you things that were found in another episode, or I may not be able to put it all into one edit for this show. But this was something that I thought, this whole show and doing this as a pre-record, something I could cover better if I could edit it myself, and if I could edit and go through it. And I don't mean as in edit and there's that sound again. I don't mean edit as in, I could make ghosts appear, or we can all make things appear if we focus like a laser directly onto that energy and pull it forward, and not the same kind of focus as in focusing on a mistake. That's the same kind of practice that makes a minor mistake explode all over the place and look worse than what it is if you focus on it. It's the same kind of focus practice. If you're focusing, however, on seeing something, bringing something forward, it will come forward. Be careful what you wish for. But at the same time, you don't have to think about scary things. You can think about productive things. Well, unless being able to see spirits is a productive thing from a psychologically introspective and investigative point of view. And there is that ringing sound again. It's been going on only since I've been recording. Truly amazing. But there were real quick that I wanted to say, and I finally figured out what it was I wanted to tell you. There was someone, the landlord, it turns out, had to scrape up a pentagram that was in the bedroom near the beds, that was on the floor. And we learned that it had been a pentagram, but someone had put it in that room. And we didn't know about that. We didn't know about that until we were almost ready to move to Vermont, and we're going to move out of the house. And we were told that, there was a pentagram on the floor that someone ridiculously put there, and we had to go in and buff it out of the floor, because it was all wooden floor in the back bedroom, and there was carpet in the rest of the house. And that was crazy in and of itself. I didn't know that was the case, didn't know these things were happening. We had the ghost child, which was sad. We had the Civil War soldier that was roaming around, lost and didn't want to leave. Then we had the shadow person. The shadow person was there was some serious negativity going on with that person. Not the Civil War shoulder, who looked like a shadow person, but was not actually. He just had a lot of emotional attachment to him, and therefore that emotional attachment energy looks dark when you see it. It resonates dark. But the really super dark being with the hat and the jacket, that was something else. It was a whole together different entity that didn't like being discovered and ran away from the investigators when they chased him. He didn't get away clearly enough, but the investigators were like, "We see you, we know you're there, we're coming after you, and we're going to get you to leave." And the Civil War soldier and the child were passed on. The older woman was looking after the child, because when they lived there way back in the years before, um, the child lived in that house in the 50s or something, and the dad taught at the college, and the kid still thought his dad was there. So it was truly sad. But we were able to take care of that place. And then when I left that place, now I'm putting this out here for the first time because I hadn't done that before. When I left that place, I took a handful of salt, and I didn't tell my friend. I just got out of the truck where we had packed everything, the car, because we had a thing that was hauling behind it, and I had a handful of salt that I had taken from the ground salt that used for melting snow, but it's the same principle with the crystals themselves and the lattice structure of the salt crystals. They do something. There's a lattice structure with the energy or whatever. And we walked around. I walked all the way around the house, because most of the house is fenced off, gated off, and I walked all the way around it. All of it's gated, but I walked all the way around through the backyard, out the fence to the front, and then sealed off. The front yard is the only part that wasn't gated. The sides and back were, or the back end of the side, and then the full backyard, which was a nice yard, the big tree, and I sealed it off with all the salt, just one large handful of salt. I didn't say what I had done in order to not cause any kind of issue, just in case, because I didn't know if it would cause an issue. So I didn't actually tell my friend what I was doing. And we got in the truck. I said, "Everything's okay. We're not going to be followed. We'll be fine." Because I had said, "Please don't follow us. Please stay here. Those who need to go and cross or leave, please leave." So again, that was July 2011, like July 1 or maybe June 30th. It was somewhere in there. And it was right around that time that I had started finally getting into the paranormal and understanding it. And again, I talk about this in my radio programs where I was interviewed. Not that I have a radio show on my own. That might change, who knows? But I was interviewed, and these kind of stories came out. Now, with all of that, I just wanted to do a quick lesson on perception and what you can hear, and that people hear different things, see different things, perceive different things. Some perceive nothing. Others perceive entirely different things. And I wanted to run the PSP 11 real quick, so let me go ahead and get that and turn it on so that I can run it and see what we get. So here we go to the main camera, to this camera, and to my camera here. That we got it going, so let's turn it on. Okay, so you just heard it turn on, and I'm putting it close enough so you can hear it, and but it's not really triggered badly by much in the way of other technology. It's not overly triggered by other technology. Now I'm going to move my microphone back a little bit, and hopefully you all can hear it. I'm trying to make it to where you can hear it through the mic, and I think the mic, I moved it. Sorry about that. And you might be able to see it in this camera over here. You'll be able to see it. So, and I'm going to do a sweep rate on it. So I'm going to push the sweep rate button or forward it. Actually, I'm going to do a, forward it. I'm going to turn it up. And I'm going to put it down because the temperature device is changing. It shouldn't be changing it. I'm not holding it. And someone just yelled. I don't know if you guys heard that or not. But I'm starting to get the hackles in the back of my neck standing up. And we're going to listen and talk to whomever is there. I'm starting to get a feeling in the room with me again. And the phone is right here, and, okay, now I reached over to pick my phone up. Now the temperature changes that it's experiencing that's going on, that shouldn't be happening that crazily, because the temperature in the room is pretty stable. It's like 73. Who's speaking with us? Who's there? What's your name? Okay. Thank you for pulling off the temperature change, the pulling back a bit. We appreciate that. Is there anything you want to talk to us about? Anything you need to say? Okay, I heard that. Like what? Okay, I'm getting a temperature variance. Again, the temperature is changing on this. Again. And so I could have you guys see this with this other camera. Check this out, if you can see it. And I'm moving the phone. But everything is staying far enough away. Can you back off a bit? So that you don't change the temperature so much. Okay, you can actually, it's really going crazy. Now, those are actually red lights. They look kind of greenish on the other camera. But I'm going to turn this back this way so that you can actually see it more. I mean, the temperature reading is going crazy in a place where the temperature is pretty stable. And again, I keep flicking my phone a bit. Okay, can you back off a little bit so that we don't have to get the temperature reading so bad? Is there something can you tell us your name? Is there something you want to tell us? Anything you want us to know? We're going to run this back so that we can hear it again. Can you back away from the temperature gauge? Try to back it up. Can you back away? Maybe, how about if I take this stuff away? See if that'll shut the temperature gauge off. This is not plugged in. Okay, so there's nothing coming from that. And the microphone is a distance away. Okay, so the temperature gauge is turned off. And as you can see also that the EMF meter is not running right now, so let me turn this a little bit so you can see the EMF meter. Well, you can see the EMF meter a little bit more. I'll try to do this. So I'll turn it a little bit more. You might be able to see it better. And EMF meter actually has to be right up on the piece of equipment, practically sitting in its face to even go off. Because that's how sensitive, that's how non-sensitive these things are. Now, the cheaper ones are overly sensitive and picks up on everything. And that's not how I really want to operate. I want to make sure that the equipment I use is high quality equipment that isn't oversensitive. It's so much better when it's not oversensitive. It takes a while to pick up. So it's not, even this is not being set off by the microphone, it's not being set off by the laptop, it's not being set off by this cam, and it's not being set off by the PSP 11, okay? It takes a while to set something like this off. There's nothing leaning against the PSP 11, and its temperature radar is going off again. It's just going off like mad. Can y'all hear that? I hope you can hear it. Did you just say yes? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told you that that's what I was hearing. I don't want to prejudice you, but when I asked the question, did you just hear that? One of them went, yes. Okay, I'm going to try not to do that, but I can hear things. I'll try to put it at the bottom, what I'm hearing. But again, that could prejudice your mind about what you're hearing. And I don't really want to do that to you, but again, different people, different things. And the temperature readout is up further than I ever expected it to be. If you can see this on this cam, the temperature readout unit is really far up there. And those are actually red lights and not white or green. These are all red lights. They just look green, strangely. So, these are actually all red lights. This is not green. It's just how the cameras are filtering the lights. Because I have a red light right here. Let me put it down, because that might be me doing that. But because this is a red light that we're using here, it hits this and makes this look green. I don't know why. So let me put that down. We'll keep it in view. Alright, so I'm taking my hand away so that the temperature readout doesn't fluctuate like that. But one has to be touching it in order to make that temperature gauge go off. So that was the reason it went off right then. Because I was holding it to show you it. And again, my EMF meter, EMF detector, is not going off. It's really sensitive and it does not go off easily. So when one of these sets off, one of these can set off, it's pretty amazing. What? Someone just called my name. Is there something you need or want to ask me before we go? I wanted to end this first colloquium, this digital colloquium. I'm not leaning any closer to it. What do you need? The temperature gauge is going on. If you all are hearing things that I'm not hearing, or I don't put at the bottom of my screen, a message meant maybe even for you. If anyone here has a message for someone listening in the audience, have that perception of time, because time is all one and everywhere, all at once, past, present, and future, so you know who's going to be listening, because they're already listening. Say so, please. Any kind of message. We really appreciate what you do, and I thank you for that. Switched up real quick, just to get I turned the temperature gauge off, and just doing this just to get a really quick speed, another scan. Now these scans are happening so fast I shouldn't get any extra words or any solid words. Hold on. Someone just went, hold on. These aren't stopping on anything longer than a fraction of a second. I shouldn't be getting any sound. It's largely white noise from the radio background. Is there anything I can do for you before I decide to finish up?
Yeah.
What is that? What is that? I'm going to go now. Let me slide my phone up. I'm going to go now. Is that okay? Is there anything you need me to know? I'm going to go now, and I'm going to say thank you. If you need help, let me know. But don't follow me if it's not necessary. Only get my attention if you need my help. Otherwise, no maliciousness, no negativity. I'll let this go. The temperature unit is changing again. I didn't turn the temperature unit on. Sorry about that. I would have had to switch that on the side. And the EMF meter hasn't moved. That's not a bad thing. That's just amazing what it would take to set that off. So it doesn't prove anything one way or the other, but a lot can be happening without the meter ever being set off. Thank you. I'm gonna take this and put it back over here. Alright. There we go. The sound's still going. Still people talking. And I shouldn't be hearing, I'm hearing the cycling going on pretty fast behind over top the words, which means the stations are cycling, hundreds of them, all at once, while a full word is being formed, and that's crazy. That's also how electronic or app ghost boxes are supposed to work when they work right, not the crappy, stupid ones that are fake. You gotta be mindful of what you buy and what you get out there. But I want to say thank you to everyone, and thank you for my listening. Yeah, it is awesome. Thank you for listening. Thank you all of you for being here and talking about, the perceptual experience of the paranormal, and kind of making this a Messenger Guardian Institute Colloquium 1 kind of thing. Thank you. I don't know if Messenger Guardians Institute will stick. May become something else, and then we'll label it something else. But this is just a tester going out there in the world. Who knows what'll come of it? But you guys will be the first to know. Enjoyed. I hope this first lesson was useful. But thank you.